It's taken to talking about drugs to get Chris Christie the most attention he's received in his long-shot presidential bid to date. During an emotional speech, the New Jersey governor delivered a scathing criticism of how we deal with drug addicts and how we send them to prison instead of focusing on treatment. The speech went viral and has received more than 5 million views. That's 4,999,000 more views than anything else the governor has done on the presidential campaign so far. Here is some of what he had to say.
My mother was a smoker. She smoked her whole life. She was addicted to nicotine. She started when she was 16 years old, which was 1948. But by the time 1964 came, the Surgeon General's report came out, and she was in her mid-30s, she knew that smoking was bad for you. And I tell you, I watched her as a kid growing up. She tried everything she could to quit. She had the gum, the patches, hypnosis. She tried everything. She couldn't quit.
Christie goes on to talk about how she was not vilified and tobacco users and alcoholics are not vilified, but those addicted to opiates often are. Fred Davie from the Union Theological Seminary, who was on Exchange yesterday talking about President Obama's prison reform, is back to talk about this salvo by Chris Christie. Fred, welcome back to Rise Exchange again.
Thank you very much.
Did this speech from the governor come out of nowhere?
Well, you know, President Obama was in town recently talking about criminal justice reform. And I think that the governor probably took the opportunity to maybe get attention for himself. That said, I have no doubt that the governor is very sincere in his expression of his feelings about what happened to his mother. And I hope he's as sincere about what he believes should be progressive policy when it comes to people who are addicted to drugs.
And he talks about a college friend, a law school friend rather, of his who died from drug addiction. What's interesting here, though, is the conversation we often hear right now are sort of the pill-popping conversation, meaning these tend to be white, middle-class Americans addicted to opiates, what begins as prescription drugs. In the 1980s, especially in New York, we heard about the cocaine versus the crack prison sentencing guidelines. You could be on Wall Street doing coke and never go to prison. If you're up in Harlem selling crack, you're spending 20 years in jail. Have we moved away from that?
Well, we should. We should never have been there in the first place. I think that's the point to be made here. I think the other point to be made here is that we have to make sure that Governor Christie and others who are in a position to fund programs, the new progressive programs related to drug addiction and drug abuse, actually fund them. And not just talk this talk, but do what it is, support what it is they say they want to do in terms of changing how we deal with people with addictions. It is too bad, I think, that we had to have an epidemic in sort of white, upper-class, suburban America before we paid attention to this.
Why is that? Other than the racial reasons, there's sort of an economic reason as well.
Well, all people should count when it comes to this issue, and it should not change just because a certain demographic that may be held in higher esteem is suddenly affected by it.
Is it just that, or is it because there are the resources there to fight this in the criminal justice system are there, the resources to get behind candidates, meaning these are people with money and visibility?
Well, I think that, again, money should not drive what we do for public policy. What is good for middle-class suburban America should be good for inner-city America.
So we hear about Chris Christie talking about this, and we hear about Rand Paul talking about this, and we hear about Cory Booker talking about this, and President Obama talking about this. But there's a lot of talk going on. President Obama has taken steps, as we discussed yesterday. But what does Congress need to do, or what the next president need to do, to really address the issue of drug users going to jail?
Drug users should not go to jail. So I think what we need to do is to do some of what we're hearing people say. Let's look for alternatives to incarceration. Let's have good community-based drug treatment programs. Let's make sure people can have access to them. Let's make sure that changes in our Affordable Health Care Act actually create opportunities for people to get the kind of care.
And we shouldn't put the similar types of drugs that do different things in different categories.
Well, we should not have one sentencing approach to crack cocaine and another one to powder cocaine. And I think the Sentencing Commission has actually suggested that, which is why the president was able to provide for the release of certain federal prisoners because the sentencing has already changed.
Is the evidence clearly in that sending people to prison does not get them off drugs long term and only destroys them economically when they get out?
I think that is absolutely correct. If people don't get the rehabilitation services they need when they're in prison, drug counseling among them, then they will come out and continue to encounter the same problems they had before they went in.
Right, Davie, we appreciate you coming back again
It's
today.
good to be back.
We'll continue to talk with you on this subject
Great.
because I have a feeling it's going to keep coming up.
Cool. Thank you very much.
Well, details have begun to emerge about the controversial Trans-Pacific Partnership that critics complain was forged in secrecy. And the House of Representatives has been voting on a bill to fund transportation improvements. Shanae Williams, okay, we just learned that Shanae Williams, who is in Washington, is not in Washington at the moment. We'll try to get to her in a few moments. So let's take a break. Coming up on Arise Exchange, New York City accuses users of Airbnb with sleeping with the enemy.